Hey, everybody, and we are live today with an exciting interview. I'm actually looking forward to this with Brian O'Loughlin, right?
That's correct. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Brian.
Where you are.
Yeah, so Brian is a healthcare fraud investigator, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And how do you, it's QLA, how do you pronounce
Qlarant.
that? With Qlarant. Okay.
Yeah.
So as a person with a last name that starts with a Q, I'm very sensitive about Q issues.
Yeah, so, yeah. It took me a little bit to understand how to pronounce it. It threw me in the interview, but it's a fantastic organization, and we carve out a very small niche market within the healthcare space, but it's important work.
Oh my gosh, yes, especially in today's day and age. So
yes.
Before we get into Qlarant real quick, what was your path to Qlarant?
So I'm gonna give the very abridged version. If you want the full version, feel free to reach out to me or actually just check out my LinkedIn page. But I started out in EMS, working 911 calls in and around New York City, graduated nursing school, and worked as an emergency room nurse and ICU nurse, and quickly, by a bunch of unusual circumstances, actually ended up in healthcare administration and claims denial, which basically translated, I was the bad guy doing the notices saying that the healthcare company is not paying for your insurance claim. So you would be eating the bill. Mm-hmm. I didn't enjoy the work, but I was in a place where I couldn't advance because I didn't have the degree, but I also couldn't afford to go back to school. So I ended up actually in the military, mm-hmm. And utilized the Army's tuition assistance program to get my master's in business administration. And then, wow. Yeah. And then, sorry about that. I'm still on at work. So, and then I got out and became a state trooper, thinking this was going to be an outstanding opportunity. And then in 2019, I was attempting to arrest a drunk driver. He decided to attack me, and in the ensuing fight, I actually broke my back.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So long, painful rehabilitation later, and that type of work was off limits, but I enjoyed the investigative aspect. Mm-hmm. And with my experience in healthcare, plus my love of actually talking to people, I ended up kind of in this role where I'm doing fraud investigations.
So I am seeing this trend, and this is really amazing to me, how people find something they love, and when you look back at the path that brought them there, it makes complete sense.
Yes.
Like claims denial. What did you do in the Army?
I was a CH-47 mechanic. I also did some work in crewing the 47F models out at Fort Bliss.
But there was a lot. It was very detail oriented to do everything. Check, yeah, right. And then you got your master's degree, your MBA through tuition assistance, which is ridiculous, by the way, but thank you. And then I can't tell you how many times I told people, like, you get this much money over your career. So you got your health claims, you've got your investigation as a law enforcement officer, and it just comes together with that business acumen.
Yes.
To lead you to what you're doing now. Did you think 5 years ago that you'd be doing this?
No, I've done work with so most of the healthcare administration work I did was actually in quality improvement. I've worked with some organizations that have had significant difficulties in the provision of healthcare. Some of them have actually made major news because of mistakes that occurred. And one of the resounding trends through all of that work was, mistake was made, and instead of fessing up to the mistake, it started this path of kind of hiding the mistake. And what was a small little speed bump becomes this huge to-do and opens up the organization to all sorts of liability issues and medical malpractice claims, and sometimes actually criminal liability. And so you see this and you try and work with people, but eventually sometimes the lessons stick, sometimes they don't. And that's where this work comes in. This is actually the enforcement side of it.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so what is Qlarant?
So Qlarant is a quality improvement organization. It is also it's an independent review organization. Most of the work we do is in the Medicare and Medicaid space, but we also have additional contracts with Veterans Administration. Most vets would be happy to know that there's an organization actually working with the VA to improve the quality and provision of care, and that's what we do. It's just not the contract line I'm on.
Do you guys investigate the 50% of people that have their CPAP machines and don't use them? And are getting their 50%? No, I don't answer that. No, I don't want to ask specific questions. That was a joke. I just saw the news article about it.
So that's a serious issue, but that's not us to investigate. What our contract with the VA predominantly would be, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but it's to do with performance improvement and the provision of care. So we're looking at documentation issues. We're looking at medical management of care and saying, is this appropriate or is it not? And how can we bring this in line with national standards? This is something that the Military and Veterans Administration has struggled with to some degree, where sometimes the care treatment decision is a little bit behind where the national standard is. There's a lot of reasons why this may be. Sometimes it's okay to be behind the power curve, but sometimes when you're lagging behind, the treatment modalities leave patients in the dark. And so we're trying to fix that.
And I'm sure some of it, unfortunately, is culture related. We never, very rarely did we ever argue with our doctors about not give me different options. I don't want to do that. As a soldier, I was like, 800 milligrams of Motrin. Okay. Yeah, that'll get rid of this. Sure. Give me another bottle. So do I get a profile with that? So all right. So that's Qlarant. So what do you do as a healthcare fraud examiner?
So largely what I do is we have a series of automated alerts built into the Medicare and Medicaid billing system. And once a provider or an organization hits a threshold, it generates an automatic, let's look into this pattern of behavior. And that once we verify the actual accuracy of the initial alert, it's passed off to an investigator like I am. What I do is I take that investigation and I build it out into a portfolio to present to law enforcement and Medicare or Medicaid for administrative or law enforcement action.
Okay, so you've got alerts when certain amount of money or certain amount of frequency or certain amount of specific actions are done too much. It generates an automatic, hey, look at this.
So recently I was working with a case. It actually just hit a resolution point this week. It was for a particular provider that was looking at, we looked at it and we found that he was billing a very high number of hours. It actually hit what they call an impossible threshold on the number of hours, but he was also billing deceased beneficiaries, so for deceased patients, and he was rendering care. Those are pretty easy things to do. So we develop a time study for it. And and this is built through Excel. And I have a data team that helps build some of the more complex tables for me. But they also, but I also called beneficiaries to speak to them to see what actual services were rendered, because sometimes data tells you a lot, but it doesn't tell you everything. And that helps develop a better picture of the situation. At times we find that it's not a real organization at all. This time this was, but we found that he was billing upwards of 22 hours a day of seeing patients, that he was billing a number of deceased beneficiaries for multiple days of service consecutively, long after they had passed, and stuff like that. That's a really, really easy, simple catch. Some of the more complex ones I'm working, but it takes us about 6 months to build most of these cases out and present them. So it's a long, slow slog to get it to the point of a resolution. But the nice part is we bring it to a resolution, we can stop the billing. A lot of times we can help with the recoupment efforts so that the tax dollars that were spent on it are actually brought back in and can be used for better purposes other than, fraudulent billing. Yep. And then we can push it from there into a law enforcement referral if there is absolute signs of criminality. So,
and we got a great question from Timothy, and it looks like I got to notice that the the profile pictures aren't showing up, and there's some kind of integration issue today. But he says, how does HIPAA impact fraud investigations? Does it make it difficult, or what are the boundaries?
So that's a really interesting question. We're working, because we are accessing healthcare data. We're have a need to know and a need to look at the data, and are the medical records. So I routinely access individuals' medical records and claims data, which is all protected. These are made through, there's a very specific request system that we send the letters out. Everything we send is encrypted, which requires the provider to call us to get the password, so that no beneficiary claim data is ever exposed without a lot of protection on it.
Yeah.
That way we protect everyone's privacy. That's really an important thing. Working across, this is a federal contract, so we're working across. I work the UPIC West region, which is I have cases in Fargo, North Dakota, California. Some of my teammates have cases in Hawaii and Guam and places like that. So it is a large area. But since it's an integrated system, we send out stuff on CMS, with CMS backing on all of our letters, and that gives us the authority to act under title and statute.
So I guess the system. And by the way, if you're doing everything on Excel, I can introduce you to some people that can make it a little easier, a little more easier. Let me just throw that away. Analytics is not Excel. I'm just going to put that out for anybody, any of my data analytics people out there. They'll just lose their mind if people say I'm doing all my analytics through Excel. But
but we have some very advanced systems that run it, and I'm building out pivot tables on a lot of my systems and things like that to make meshing through sometimes 60,000 lines of data into something that's a manageable, readable, understandable product.
Yeah, I just I was talking to Rory. I'm sorry for the side segue. I was talking to Rory Patterson from Databricks, used to be at Splunk. And he shared me that their data analytics platform was originally built to help design what became Netflix's recommendations. I think it's Apache. I can't remember the last part of it. Apache Spark, and that's what they use to do all the data analytics for everything. So, it was just interesting to see that whole side of the world. I mean, I'm gonna have to get him on at some point. But so your system is set up. Threshold gets crossed. Bing, bing, bing. Somebody needs to take a look at it.
Yes.
Does it go to you? Is it set up on where you're at and what your caseload looks like?
There's a rotating basis on who gets assigned cases, but there's basically an intake investigator who does all the vetting and pulls some basic information
Yep.
together to create basically the original case file to start working with. And then it looks at the caseload and who has how many cases and how long it's been since you've had a new case assigned to you. The goal is to bring each investigator to bring 6 to 8 investigations to significant administrative action annually.
Oh, wow, that's not a lot.
No, but it can be a tremendous amount of work.
Yeah.
So, sometimes we're talking 3 months to do a solid medical review, because it takes a month for the providers have a month to provide the medical records. We have about 60 days to review everything that's brought in. Well, that's half your time already.
Yeah.
So
can we walk through this?
Sure.
You get assigned a case.
Yes.
What do you do?
So first thing I do is I verify that the provider is still active. A lot of times they've deactivated if they're doing other fraudulent activity. There are certain things we can shut down immediately through immediate advisement setups, and this has to do with patient safety type issues. So if there is gross malpractice going on, there's immediate advisement so we can stop the practice so that we can protect people.
Right. I would have never thought of that, by the way.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, it's literally a red pull cord to stop the train right there.
Yeah.
And if not, what I typically do is I look through the beneficiaries, I see what kind of the allegation is, and then I start trying to find claims that match at least some degree of the allegation. So if we say, hey, this person is billing for a large number of days, I find a busy day that they were billing, and I start calling people that were seen on them supposedly that day. And I'm like, hey, can you tell me about this? And typically it's a 30, 40-minute conversation I have with them, and that helps me kind of get a direction to go. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with individuals that that are extremely elderly or, don't have resources to buy a cell phone routinely, it can be difficult. So we have other pathways forward. I can access through a very secure server. It basically takes like 5 logins to get into it. I can pull fresh claims data, look at it, say, okay, these are recent people that have seen this service. I have new demographic information for them. Let me see what's going on. And at least talk to them, understand the services that are being rendered, and build from there. I can request patient censuses, I can request medical records, and I start building this case. And as that information comes in, then it goes, I say, hey, either this is starting to look like a legitimate case. Let's start moving this towards the queuing for presentation towards Medicare and Medicaid. Or, hey, this looks like maybe we just need to do a little bit of provider education, which is a different route, versus, hey, there's nothing here. And quite a few of them, there's just, there's a limited number of providers in certain areas. I mean, we're covering some very remote territory where there may be 1 or 2 providers. So yes, they're billing at a high rate, but they're billing at a high rate because they're in a remote territory and they're maybe the only endocrinologist for a couple of 100 miles. And so that explains why their billing rate's high. But it's worth checking. And every once in a while, providers have some of their information stolen and are utilized by companies to order stuff on behalf of beneficiaries, whether or not it's requested.
Right.
And what we're doing is we're actually providing protection for the doctors on their provider information.
Yeah.
So looking at both sides to provide as much protection and honesty and integrity to a system. Like right now, my portfolio of cases encompasses about $750 million worth of billing, of which about $200 million has been paid. So we're not talking a small amount of money here.
No, that's incredible. So do you actually, I love it. So red flag goes up, it gets assigned to you. You dive in right away to make sure that you need to save some people from a provider that shouldn't be operating.
Yes.
If you don't pull that red flag, then you start doing some research. Do you call the provider first, or do you do the research?
It depends. So it depends. A lot of times it depends on the allegation and the investigative history.
Yeah.
So we have, every time a provider is investigated, it creates a unique identifier on their portfolio. And when we look at it, if it's a first time that they've ever been investigated, it's usually worth a call to the provider first. Because a lot of times they're not doing anything wrong. Something unusual is occurring. And getting them aware and on board and working with us is important, because that way they're protected. You know, we're protecting tax dollars, we're protecting patients, and we're stopping these fraudulent activities from occurring. I
can imagine though, if there was several previous investigations, you start to think, well, where there's smoke, there's fire. You know.
And like the case I presented this week, the guy had 5 previous investigations of some sort, and there just hadn't been quite enough there. And finally, there had been enough time lapse that we managed to catch the act this time.
Right.
But it can be difficult, and it takes a lot of due diligence, a lot of looking at this data, a lot of attention to detail, and a lot of talking to people, because a tremendous amount of information can be gained if you can actually talk to both the provider and patients that have been seen.
Right. And I can imagine in today's world, it's not always as easy to get in touch with the patient.
No, we use Thomson Reuters Clear service. It's a background investigation software to try and locate individuals. However, as cell phones rotate on a regular basis, it can be very difficult. And that's why we have the ability to request a census to try and get updated information.
Yeah.
Typically, I'll send that with a medical records request so that I'm not burdening the provider excessively.
I would bet in today's world, I mean, there's an older population that still probably answers their phone regularly, and that's why these spammers are still in business. But if I answer an unknown number, which I do on occasion, I'm an optimist, and I hear, is this Michael Quinn? I just hang up the phone. I'm like, or if there's a pause or anything else like that, and I wonder how many times now granted, I'm not up for any healthcare fraud investigations or anything like that. I'm not a provider. I'm not doing anything wrong. But I just click. I'm not even, if it doesn't sound like it's a real person that is calling me to talk to me, click. And I wonder, and I've seen with this how maybe 17% of service members that sign up and say they want an internship, and we have to call, we have to text, and we have to email to get 17% follow-up. And they're the ones that said they wanted it.
Yes.
I could imagine from this perspective, calling to talk about their healthcare needs.
It can be a very time-consuming process to locate people. It can be quite a negotiation for them to understand that this is not a sales pitch or a scam. Because it is a very, we're talking about very sensitive issues. I have multiple hospices and home carers that I'm working cases on right now, and these hospices in particular, we're talking about potentially terminal diagnoses. So I'm calling to talk about probably the most sensitive thing on the planet, and you have no idea who I am. And that really requires a high degree of actually communicating effectively, communicating what your needs are, that you're not trying to scam them. You're actually advocating on behalf of their healthcare needs, and that you're actually providing a legitimate and significant service to the taxpayer and to them, as well as the providers. Sometimes there's a high degree of misunderstanding, especially on similar sounding or similar types of services, but they're different. But the billing rates can be astronomically different, like the difference between home care versus hospice. Well, home care is fantastic, but it pays a fraction of what the hospice rate does. And hospice is end of life care, so it's designed for typically up to 6 months, but typically it's much shorter than that. So there's less honest organizations try and get people signed up into hospice care. But the downside of that is as soon as you get into hospice care, a lot of your other ancillary support services like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, stuff that actually improves the quality of life for patients goes away. And so that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get them into the correct level of care. We're trying to get everyone billing honestly and billing appropriately. I mean, there's been numerous instances of home care and hospice fraud that are up in the hundreds of millions of dollars because it's an easy area for stuff to occur in. The documentation, because of the way it's set up, it can be questionable at times. And so that's where we see the vast majority of it. The other thing is durable medical equipment. So those of us that are lucky enough to have VA or TRICARE cover durable medical equipment, we don't have to worry about this. But back braces, knee braces, TENS machines, I mean, orthotic shoe inserts, I mean, you name it. These things are very expensive medically. And so if they can find a way to run the bill on hundreds and hundreds of beneficiaries and send them unnecessary or unwanted durable medical equipment, these bills can get out into the millions of dollars very quickly.
Wow. First of all, one of the most understated benefits of retiring from the military has been TRICARE.
Yes.
And, the Veteran Benefits Administration. So my benefits in TRICARE, I never knew how incredible benefits they've been. So that's been really exciting and really supportive. But I could see how, for other people where they're getting billed on everything's being itemized differently.
Yes.
That could get out of hand. So what is your day like? I mean, I see the part of your day is done with the remote control truck, right? That's like
and followed by the Rubik's Cube back there, if you can see that. But no, most of my day is I started about I'm in the Las Vegas area. I started about 6 to 6:30 in the morning. I'm done at about 3 to 4 in the afternoon, depending on what I got going on. Typically, it's a couple of hours on the phone or Zoom every single day.
Yep.
And a lot of it is looking at data, writing it up in such a way that it makes sense to move the case on to the next step. Yep. And coordinating with other members of a really diverse team of individuals. So I'm a registered nurse myself, obviously, but not everyone on my team that does the investigations is. So we have a team of nurses that do most of the documentation review. We have medical providers, so doctors, PAs, nurse practitioners, and the like, that do higher level reviews for more complex cases. We have an entire data team that are staffed with people with PhDs in various math subspecialties that are phenomenal and make my head spin when I request data and they crank out something that's just an incredible document back to me. And we have an entire support staff to help us with taking in documents, sending out documents, scanning in large quantities of medical records. All of these things, it's a multidisciplinary team. And I have to talk to a large number of people every single day just to make sure my cases are moving and if they need support, because we're all a team. So if they're encountering a roadblock from a provider or I am, one of us can usually figure a way around it so that we can move forward with what we need to do. And that's really what I really appreciate about my organization. And I can't speak highly enough of, is we really work, even though we're remote, we found a way as an organization to effectively work remote with a high degree of team cohesiveness. And that's something I haven't really seen since the military in such a regard. And it's really nice and refreshing, and it's something I really appreciate.
And it's difficult to do. It's not something that happens automatically. Well, yeah, go ahead.
And particularly with the complexities of a mostly remote workforce. I mean, I have teammates in Arizona, California, obviously some in the Nevada area. and we also have individuals in Dallas, Maryland, and a pile of other states that I'm not even fully aware of. So, working cohesively as a team like that is challenging.
I got to say, early in my Army career as a counterintelligence agent, we did the security clearance investigations overseas. So we handled all of that. And then I've been an investigator in my career. And one of the things that I loved the most was that you were never doing the same thing every day. You were always talking to somebody. You never know what they were going to say. Some people said something to me. I'm like, please, what? Don't say that. No, like you see it happening. And it's like a train wreck.
Yes.
And you just gotta let them go, and then you got your basic 5 interrogatives: who, what, where, when, why, and how. Like, all right, and it was just like that was what was so intriguing to me about the career field, was that I could never sit there and just do the same thing every single day, and it kept me. And that sounds a lot like what you come across. So,
I mean, it's
go ahead.
It's fantastic because I have hospice cases. I have a wide variety of physicians that I deal with. I have surgical centers. I have ambulances, durable medical equipment companies. So I speak to a wide variety of people from all over the country, and every once in a while you get a very interesting response from someone.
Oh yeah. So I'm sure I'm not the only one that's very intrigued by what you do, right? So what does it take if a service member, a veteran, a military spouse wants to do what you do? What does it take?
So there's a few skills. Healthcare helps. It's not a requirement. But if you have a healthcare background, it makes translating the nonsense you see in claims into something that makes a little more sense. And then the other thing that is really important is really being organized. I have a portfolio of 24 cases at any given moment. They all have various timelines. Some have to be updated every 2 weeks, some every 3 weeks. So it can get very confusing if you're not organized. Those are really the two most important skills. Beyond that, college is important, not required for what my current role. Investigative background helps because you've learned how to ask the right questions the right way and can really make a difference. So
if somebody wanted to do that and they had some of those, say they had healthcare background and a degree and they're organized.
Sorry, we had a off screen.
So, well, I think that might be a natural break, I guess, because it sounds like that's very important around computers. If somebody wanted to reach out to you with questions about how they can get into the field, would you be okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to send me a note, and I will happily talk to anyone that's interested and try and help them any way they can. It's a very interesting, diverse career field. And it's a fantastic. I work for a fantastic company. I can't speak highly enough of them. And they were really actively working to try and recruit and military spouses into the organization. So it is a great time to reach out. They actually have several intern programs running right now, that are paid. So it's probably it's worth the time right now to reach out. And talk to either myself or anyone on the HR team over there, and they'll set you right.
All right. Well, we need to follow up on that. If I can send anybody your way, let me know.
Absolutely.
But, I think that coffee spill was right next to your work computer.
It was, yes.
So go take care of that, Brian. Thank you, and we'll catch up soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone.